Okay, hi everybody. So this video is sort of a long time in the making, and by this video I mean this sequence of videos. This week what we're going to start talking about, and start and finish talking about, is the client-side code, or the client-side aspect of multi-tier sort of full-stack development. So this particular module, so this week of content, is completely new in the class, which is partly why this has taken kind of so long to get together. And it also doesn't really have anything to do with C#, which is another reason why it's kind of taken a long time to get together. So what we have talked about in the past is we've talked about the fact that client-side code really runs on kind of a user's localized machine. And the idea, sort of modern architecture, is to try to compress that code as much as physically possible so that you have a thinner and a thinner and a thinner client-side experience. And then you have way more code on the server. So if you're doing something like building a banking application, for example, you could have maybe a website that has very rudimentary kind of code in terms of just CRUD operations in a browser, and then all of the kind of heavy lifting, validation, linking accounts and building new accounts and all that kind of stuff happens on the back end. So that's the distinction between client-side code and server-side code. So everything that we've done up to this point in the class has been client-side code. In days of old, WPF would have been the quintessential way that you would build client-side code with C#. But as we talked about last week and the week before that, it's a little bit dated. And so a lot of software companies are moving away from just sort of raw WPF applications and toward something closer to a web app that's built in something like Angular or something like React. So today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through how you actually create a client-side SPA, or a single page application, in Visual Studio. And starting next week, what we'll do is we'll start adding additional solutions or additional projects to our solution so that we can use that SPA as a sort of entry point into our server-side code over here, which will all be built in C# Web API. So I've seen some of the feedback from writing assignment that people are still kind of confused about why a person would use C#. C# Web API is my #1 answer to that question. So C# Web API allows you to take payloads from client-side code and automatically map those kind of JSON blobs, which you'll see in just a second, to server-side statically typed, strongly statically typed methods that can then be pushed from an application server into a database. So the project that we're going to be working on in the next couple of videos is basically just a very run-of-the-mill kind of data management system, not unlike the help desk application that we built in WPF, but it's going to be all around courses and semesters and class information. So we'll take a look at that in just a minute, but in this video what I want to do is help you get everything set up, which is a little bit less trivial than it sounds. So one more time, what we're focusing on this week is client-side code. All that client-side code is going to be HTML5 and JavaScript. It's going to have nothing to do with C#. In the programming assignments for next week on through the end of the semester, you can absolutely use an SPA application, and I'm going to give you the sort of shell of an SPA app in Canvas that's going to mimic exactly what we're about to do in the videos. Or you can build a WPF app, or you can build a console app and just sort of cut the UI out of it entirely. The class, what's really, really important is that you understand how to transfer information from the client side to the server side code, and how to kind of decentralize logic between two different machines. So that doesn't necessarily require you to have an SPA. SPAs are just sort of the new way of doing it, and I think that it's important for you to at least see it one time. The way that we're going to do it is the most rudimentary, sort of straightforward way, kind of from first principles. There are obviously whole templates in Visual Studio that you can use to build an Angular application or a React application. What we're going to do is basically just use Angular right out of the box as an extension to HTML5 and sort of call it a day. So let's get started with the actual project. So what we need to do is go to Visual Studio, and you can run this thing as an administrator. So this is really the first time that running Visual Studio as an administrator is going to be absolutely critical. And the reason it's going to be critical is because Visual Studio for these web application projects is going to use a system called IIS, or Internet Information Systems, or services, to host your web service in the backend. So basically what will happen is this will be an IIS project. It will run inside of IIS, and IIS will serve both the web front end for the SPA, and it will host the services layer, so the actual API layer that we're going to use as backend code. And then all of that stuff will call off to Microsoft SQL Server, which we'll also set up in 2 weeks. So I've done several practice runs here, but basically what you want to do is click Create a New Project. And here you have 2 paths to go down. So if you're on a Windows machine, .NET Framework, the .NET Framework version of ASP.NET Web Application is what you want. If you are on a Mac, this is the only thing that you're going to have access to. This has some additional caveats associated with it, particularly in the startup routine, which is actually written in C#. I'm going to post a subsequent video about how to get around those things, but essentially everything else in the videos will all be the same. So what we're going to do now is go down the happy path, which is the .NET Framework version. We can click Next. We're going to do, this is, I don't know, this is SPA code walkthrough. Create that thing, and you're going to get a whole bunch of options. So these options go through the gambit of kind of templates that are automatically set up for you with various libraries and whatever. So web forms is kind of an older technology. MVC and single page application are set up with slightly different libraries, and so you can sort of go through and figure out which ones are associated with which libraries. Web API is the type of application that we're going to be talking about next week. So this week what we're going to do is do an empty project and create that thing. Cool. So, as you can see, this is in fact very empty. So in here, you can go to various sort of educational links to figure out where to get started, but I have done a little bit of the heavy lifting for you. So in the Canvas site, you will find 2 documents. One is called app.js, one is called index.html. If you right-click on your project at the top and you paste those things in, and make sure that these are not nested in a directory. If you do that, you have to change some file paths or whatever. And then you should be able to click Go here. And up will pop a window, and this will be set to whatever web browser you have configured as your default browser. You can actually change this in project settings, so you can go to this drop down. You can change the web browser to any web browser you have enabled, and you can also go to the project properties. If you right click on the actual project itself, go to properties. There are, let's see, web, right here. You can do IIS Express or local IIS. So local IIS requires that you install some additional sort of framework components. And so I'll put a link in Canvas about exactly what to do in order to enable local IIS. But basically, the long and short of it is IIS Express is a development-only mode of IIS that is effectively virtual. So it builds a virtual web server in the back end. It takes all of this stuff and whatever is marked as the startup project that we were talking about in the last code walkthrough. We will be the entry point into the website on the server. And then if you have additional APIs, all of those will be referenced or hosted and then referenced from the same solution in different projects. And so that is in the next week of lectures where we actually kind of tie code on the client side and the server side all together. So if we look really quickly at app.js and index.html, and to finish this thought, so if you go back over here, IIS or local IIS, what that means is it's actually physically pushing the files out to a local copy of IIS on your machine. So when you choose local IIS and then local IIS after you save this, what will happen is when you run this application, it will publish the application to your local instance. And so you can actually go to your local instance of IIS and reference the website there. So you can think of IIS Express as basically the temporary kind of development mode, and then local IIS is a more sort of persistent experience. So the caveat with all of this is that the class is not about HTML and the class is not about JavaScript. So this is an absolute bare bones situation in terms of CRUD operations. It's not pretty, it's black and white, and I put it together in approximately 3 hours. Well, 3 hours are the screaming child, so it's probably closer to an hour and a half. So be kind. We're basically just going to use this as a test harness to show how to do data transfer between a client and a server-side implementation. So I want to quickly go through what the code is actually doing. So in HTML, we have these scripts at the top. These are this one right here is for Angular, so this is sort of scripting out the Angular framework. This one is for routing, which we're not going to cover in the class, but I will make an effort to post a link about routing. This is a truly SPA experience, so you can take whole components of the site and then exchange those components back and forth without reloading the whole app. We're going to kind of skirt this issue by using visibility instead of reloading whole components, but it's the most popular way of doing kind of component development in Angular. And then we have Font Awesome, which we're going to use to do these things. So these are all fonts, and they all come from Font Awesome. I'm basically just using the free version. Then we have this script tag. This script tag loads the app.js JavaScript controller, and in index.html we have a style that basically just styles out some buttons and menu items, which we'll see in just a little bit. And then we have one big div that does everything, and we're going to actually look a little bit more in depth at about what all of these different components are actually doing. So if I go to the application to do just a kind of quick walkthrough, the idea is that you can select fall or spring or summer, or you can create a new semester, so maybe fall 2020, create that thing, and then you can either select a course, and so in the future, in next week's lecture, we're actually going to start attaching syllabi and stuff like that. But for now, what we're doing is we're selecting a class, and it's telling you who taught the class and how many people took it. So we had a fall class of this course, C#. There were 17 people in it. I taught software engineering in 2020, and there were 120 people in it, blah, blah, blah. And then we can also do things like COT 4420 reputation is me. I think right now it's 65. And you hit OK. I think I have it debugging in the background. And ideally, we'll go through fixing this situation, but ideally what would happen is it would pop over here and be created. And I've broken that somehow. So in the next video, what we'll do is we'll A, fix that situation, and B, we'll take a look at how each of these components is rendered in HTML, and we'll talk about how MVC is used to kind of A, render the view to the user, and then B, provide a controller that actually allows you to manipulate data inside of this thing. So thanks very much, and I will see you in the next one.